Refreshing wild cherry cola meets smooth cream. The treat you deserve. Pepsi Wild Cherry and Cream. Treat yourself.
Dedication isn't born in the light of day. It's carved in the quiet hours before the world blinks awake. At Boar's Head, we rise with a mission to deliver craftsmanship worthy of your table. A slice of something special folded into every moment worth savoring. Because dedication means delivering only the very best. Boar's Head, committed to craft since 1905.
K-pop Demon Hunters Haja Boys breakfast meal and Huntrix meal have just dropped at McDonald's. They're calling this a battle for the fans. What do you say to that, Rumi?
It's not a battle. So glad the Saja boys could take breakfast and give our meal the rest of the day.
It is an honor to share.
No, it's our honor.
It is our larger honor.
No, really. Stop.
You can really feel the respect in this battle. Pick a meal to pick a side.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
At participating McDonald's while supplies last.
So good, so good, so good.
New spring arrivals are at Nordstrom Rack stores now. Get ready to save big with up to 60% off Rag & Bone, Marc Jacobs, Free People, and more.
How did I not know Rack has Adidas?
Because there's always something new.
Join the Nordy Club to unlock exclusive discounts, shop new arrivals first, and more. Plus, buy online and pick up at your favorite Rack store for free. Great brands, great prices. That's why you Rack.
This episode is brought to you by Palmolive. Family time isn't just the big moments, it's weeknight dinners. Sitting around the table, everyone talking all at once. So when the plates are empty and the sink is full, use Palmolive Ultra. Palmolive's most powerful formula removes up to 99.9% of grease, leaving your dishes sparkling clean. And the new convenient pump makes cleaning even easier, so you can spend less time tackling dishes and more time together. Shop now at palmolive.com.
All you heroes, hawks, crows, rooks, and inquisitors. Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we unpack, discuss, and theorize about all the lore behind the Dragon Age series.
We are so excited to bring you this podcast. Every episode will be covering a different topic in the Dragon Age universe, from character deep dives to exalted marches and elven gods. We'll cover it all.
There will be spoilers. And always remember, swooping is bad.
Hello and welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we talk about Dragon Age and its lore. I'm one of your hosts, Austin, also known as Teacup.
And I'm your other host, Shelby or Shecup.
That you are, and we're here for another episode of the Dragon Age Lorecast. We're continuing with our human tribes today, the Avvar, the Chasind, and the Clayne.
Clayne. Like clay with an N on the end.
All right.
Anyway, so let's get started with some fun facts. So the first one is one that you might know. It's a pretty common trivia fact that I hear a lot in the fandom. But in Dragon Age Origins, there was going to be a human origin that was from the Avvar tribe. According to David Gator, they would have attended a gathering of Avvar clans where one other clan attacks and wipes out the one that you came from. Of course, Duncan would save the day. It was cut, though, because they could not decide on and didn't have enough resources for a distinctly Avvar look.
Interesting. I had heard that there was like a human commoner.
Yeah.
Because everything else, every other race has two potential origins. You could be a Dalish elf or a city elf, a dwarven noble or dwarven commoner. So I knew that they had a like human commoner thing, but I remember that like they scrapped it because it very much like fell into the like chosen farm boy.
Yeah, I think
trope.
that's different than this one.
Oh.
I think that one was way early in development, and they basically were like, oh my God, we've just made Luke Skywalker. We have to cut this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a trap that we all fall into.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so my next trivia fact is that the Avvar god Hakken is mentioned in multiple games, the most significant being Inquisition's DLC, Jaws of Hakken, but Hakken is also mentioned in Dragon Age Origins Awakening. However, it is spelled, instead of Hakkon, it is spelled Haakon, which is the more traditional spelling.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Mm-hmm.
It's because I haven't played Awakening.
I know you haven't. And not only have you not played Awakening, you haven't played Awakening with care. You've just like bulldozed your way through everything and haven't paid attention to anything.
That is also correct.
I know it's correct. It's how you play every game. It drives me crazy. Anyway, the legendary Ash Warriors, for my third fun fact, are humans who practice the dwarven berserker fighting style. And they actually came from the Clayne tribes and were founded in honor of their legendary leader, Luthias Dwarfson, who we'll talk about a little bit later. But also, speaking of legendary Clayne chieftain Luthias Dwarfson, there are two areas of the hinterlands that are named after him, Lake Luthias and Dwarfson's Pass.
So is this chieftain, like, are they a son of a dwarf?
We will get there.
Okay.
Put that in your back pocket, please. So, let's get into the Avvar. I'm so excited for this episode. I love all of these three tribes so much. They're so interesting to me. And there's so much good, deep lore here. So I do want to give just a little bit of a background in the Avvar, and that you should go listen to our episode on the history of the Avvar first, because if you haven't already, because that will be a good foundation for this episode. Like, we're not going to spend a lot of time on the culture and the religion of the Avvar, because we've already done that in that first episode. And so we're going to dive into their kind of like political history and notable figures. And this will be a common theme for today's episode especially. But one of the first things to know about the Avvar is that, like, while we often think of them as just like one tribe of people, they are in actuality many different clans who are loosely united via culture, location, and a shared history and narrative.
And like, this is true of like any kind of tribal people in real life, and like even in Thedas, like the Dalish clans are all uniquely different with traditions, but they have a shared ancestral cultural bond.
Right, and that ties them together. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so another just kind of disclaimer I want to give before we get into it. While the Avvar's territories are located within Fereldan, they absolutely do not, under any circumstances, consider themselves to be Fereldan. They are Avvar, and they will fight you over this if you call them Fereldan.
That's probably fair.
Yeah, I think it is very fair. So, okay, let's get into the politics. Back in the day, in the ancient age, they were once part of the Alamari Confederation, which, if you remember, the Alamari become Fereldan, but they crossed the Frostbacks and split off in minus 2415. So, like, we're talking almost 3,000 years it's been, okay, since the Avvar have been split officially from the Alamari. So that is significant. As we kind of talked about earlier, the legends say that they were escaping a shadow goddess. Solus asserts that shadow goddess was real. Modern Thedosian historians say it's just some kind of natural disaster. We'll never know the answer to that, but that is kind of their origin story. But by the time that the Tevinter Imperium started aggressively expanding their borders southward, many of the Avvar had settled in the Vimark Mountains outside of Kirkwall. Some of those clans were wiped out by Tevinter's legions, while others were enslaved or forced to flee south across the Waking Sea into more of the Frostbacks. Around minus 712 ancient, the Imperium launched their first expedition against the Avvar officially, planning to march all the way into the mountains to defeat the last of the tribes. And then the Imperium had planned to turn their attention fully to the Chasind and the Alamari. But the Avvar put up much heavier resistance than expected after Tevinter seized a sacred relic from one of their gods. So, yeah, they were pretty feisty back to Tevinter, as you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the story of how the Avvars are attacked. But I also think it should be noted that the Avvar have also gone to war with pretty much every nation in Thedas. So we've discussed Tevinter.
I mean, this is fair. Like, we do interact with the Avvar, I think, before Inquisition.
Oh, yeah, we do.
But, like, one of our first encounters with the Avvar in Inquisition is you fight them in the place or whatever. With the spirits in the marsh. I forget what it's called.
Oh,
but like if you touch the water, all the corpses come out.
What is it called?
I don't know.
It's near Crestwood.
Yes. But you fight that, and then after you beat that, an Avvar shows up and is throwing a goat at your wall.
True.
And so like
there is some violence there. Yeah, fair. Very fair. So, okay, let's get into the wars. So I think in the time of the Second Blight, Hafter and his people were kind of like working to drive out the Darkspawn and the rest of the Blight out of the south. There was a faction that broke off and formed the Jaws of Hacking cult, which we can talk about. You can play in Inquisition. And as you know, Emperor Draken I sent Inquisitor Ameridan to deal with this. I think you can count this tangentially as a war with Orlais. Actually, as warring with both the elves of the Dales and as warring with Orlais. So there's 3 right there. But they also warred with their fellow Alamari. After the Alamari had really been decimated by the Second Blight, the Avvar joined forces with the Chasind to exploit their diminished numbers. And so they were attempting to take lands from the Alamari, but to the Chasind and the Avvar's surprise, the Alamari were more powerful than they'd expected and somehow prevailed. So the Avvar and the Chasind basically had to like flee from this war that they've started. They had to run home with their tail tucked between their legs. They fled back into the wilds and back to the mountains. And that's like really what has cemented their current locations. Like since this war after the Second Blight, like the Chasind have been in the Korkari wilds and the Avvar have been in the Frostback Mountains, and like they really haven't tried to expand or change their territories since then, which leaves, as you know, the rest of the Fereldan lowlands to the Alamari.
Mm-hmm. Which they then just become Fereldan.
Right, exactly. And I also think, obviously important to note that the Avvar also would go on to attack when Fereldan is Fereldan. Under the warlord named Barak, they attacked the Benorn in massive numbers, but again are pushed out of the valley in just a couple of years. But it wasn't a complete failure because the Avvar's incursion into Fereldan kicked off one of the worst famines that the lowlands has ever seen. And really, it's this famine that cemented the relations between the Avvar and the lowland Fereldans to just be abysmal. Like this is like the last nail in the coffin of like, we are not friends, we do not get along. Like the relationship never recovered, even though they came from the same people group.
Yeah, I know. It is just really, really interesting. And like, I think we see a pattern here, and we'll probably talk about this, but like Fereldan holds grudges.
Well, when everybody's trying to attack you, I mean, yeah, I would hold a grudge too.
Yeah, I that's totally and 100% fair. Definitely. And I get that. Do they have any friends?
Yes, they do have friends. The Avvar do have friends. Their friends and allies are primarily regarding trade, which makes sense because they can't do agriculture. Go ahead.
Fallowmire.
Yes. Thank you. You looked that up, didn't you?
I did. It was driving me insane.
Okay, fair. Very fair. back to the Avvar's friends. So again, primarily for trade because they can't do agriculture. They live in the mountains. There's only so much you can grow. So they are friendly, very friendly, were and are with the dwarves. The dwarves helped them build the fortresses of Kinloch Hold and Vigil's Keep now, which are Fereldan's Circle of Magi and Grey Warden Stronghold, respectively. In addition to their friendship with Orzammar, they're also allied with the Carta, which is how they acquire primarily weaponry, but also heavy metals and other supplies that they need. And then secondly, even though they warred with Orlais in the Divine Age, they do now have a tacit agreement of alliance with them. There's commerce, dialogue, and at least some kind of cultural exchange of ideas with the Empire. And a lot of Avvar holds even have like quite a few Orlesian books. Traders from the Avvar can actually be found in most major Orlesian cities doing business. We know for a fact that they're frequently found in Leeds, Vershel, and Val Royeaux. The goods that the Avvar export are primarily like furs, leathers, those kinds of things, and then they're purchasing spices and anything else that the Avvar cannot make or acquire on their own. So spices especially is like the number one thing that they get for like special meals on significant occasions. Books, paper, inks, maybe a little bit less inks because they can make some of that. But yeah, so that's kind of their trading and their friends and allies. Do you have any thoughts before we get into a few notable Avvars?
No, not really. Other than just like, I do find it really interesting that they're nice with Orlais.
I know.
Just is really funny to me, but I guess that's whatever. They're just always interested to me, especially after Inquisition. And the fact, I mean, it's just such a strong opening, the guy who throws the goat at your wall.
That's so true. I do think that they're just like enigmatic. There's just something about them that makes me interested in them.
I agree. Who are notable Avvars?
Yeah, so we have a few, and I don't want to get into their stories because like some of them have been side characters. Some of them we'll talk about later. You can go back and listen to our whole entire podcast. But some notable Avvars include Tyrda Brightaxe, Thelm Goldhanded, Morganon, and the man himself, Mafarath.
Morganon sounds like if Morrigan was an avatar of Elgranon instead of Flemeth.
Yes, we've talked about her before.
Yes.
So
there is a theory that like she is named, like our Morrigan is named after her.
Yes, exactly. All right. Well, I think now is a good time for our mid-break.
All right.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. Listening to this podcast? Smart move. Being financially savvy? Smart move. Another smart move? Having State Farm help you create a competitive price when you choose to bundle home and auto. Bundling, just another way to save with the personal price plan. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices are based on rating plans that vary by state. Coverage options are selected by the customer. Availability, amount of discounts and savings, and eligibility vary by state.
Ever feel like your brain just won't click? Onnit Alpha Brain is a daily supplement engineered to support memory, focus, and mental speed. Made with science-backed ingredients, Onnit Alpha Brain helps you lock in, tune out distractions, and stay sharp. See what your brain can really do. Visit onnit.com and shop Alpha Brain to unlock your next level. That's ONNIT.com.
Springfest is happening now at Lowe's. Keep the spotlight on your yard with Stay Green Premium 2 cubic foot mulch, 5 bags for $10. Plus, when you want more help indoors, get up to 40% off select major appliances that help you supercharge your chores. Our best lineup is here at Lowe's. Valid through 4/22 while supplies last. Selection varies by location. See Lowe's.com for details. Mulch offer excludes Alaska and Hawaii.
I've got this nefarious plan to go around to each of them and secretly tell them all the nasty things you said. That way they'll mutiny and I shall become the group leader.
You know, we have more comfortable rooms and basically infinite space, so Why does the trained assassin prefer a quiet, unassuming spot with good choke points?
Guess you just answered that question.
Besides, I'm closer to the coffee.
Just wondering if the feathered pauldrons are an essential part of the moody rebel mage persona.
What are you talking about?
I'm working on an epic poem about a hopelessly romantic apostate, waging an epic struggle against forces he can't possibly defeat.
What do you mean, can't possibly defeat?
Well, it's not a good story unless the hero dies.
Well, thank you for listening, and we're here in the middle of the show where we talk about things that go on with the podcast, but that are not about the lore of Dragon Age. And so thank you to our patrons, and a special thank you to our first patrons, Genesis and Lisa M. If you want to join us and support the podcast on Patreon, you can do so at DA Lorecast. That is not a URL. You can do that at patreon.com/DA Lorecast. And another great way to support us is to leave us ratings and reviews on Apple or Spotify. If you leave us 5 stars and some kind words, we'll read it out on a future episode of the show. And so today I have a comment from Grant on our 200th episode. And Grant says, congratulations on 200 episodes. Looking forward to 200 more. You guys and Gil, Dathar, and Katie are my go-to for DA lore, and I am sad that her and Jordan probably won't be doing the Split the Veil anymore. Origins is my fave of the games, with DAI being a close second. Have a love-hate relationship with the Veilguard. Congrats again. Much love and respect. I, too, have a love-hate relationship with the Veilguard, and it's becoming more hate these days. But it is a good game, and if you haven't played it, you should. But thank you so much for that comment there, and we greatly appreciate your support. Last thing I have is come hang out with us on Discord. You can find that link in the episode description to the Cups Podcasting and More Discord. It's the best place on the internet. Come hang out. Come talk about Dragon Age, Assassin's Creed, Pokemon, anything that's going on in there that you want to talk about. It's a great place to hang out and great people to talk to. And with that, I think we can get back to the episode.
This episode is brought to you by Fandango. People say fans are too distracted these days, but the truth is, when a great movie hits the screen, you show up, you stay glued, invested, part of the story. And without fans like you, there'd be no cinema magic, no shared moments. So head to Fandango.com to get tickets, stream, or rent or buy top movies and series. Fandango loves fans.
Protein is now at Starbucks, and it's never tasted so good. You can add protein cold foam to your favorite drink or try one of our new protein lattes or matcha. Try it today at Starbucks.
LifeLock, how can I help?
The IRS said I filed my return, but I haven't.
1 in 4 tax-paying Americans has paid the price of identity fraud.
What do I do? My refund, though. I'm freaking out.
Don't worry, I can fix this.
LifeLock fixes identity theft guaranteed and gets your money back with up to $3 million in coverage.
I'm so relieved.
No problem. I'll be with you every step of the way.
1 in 4 was a fraud-paying American. Not anymore. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
My people have heard legends of the Grey Warden's strength and skill. Though I suppose not every legend is true.
That's really helpful. What are you, the elven god of sarcasm?
Lies, treachery, and rebellion, depending upon the story. And how could I help? I do not have my ritual dagger. I cannot access my network of mirrors to travel from the lighthouse to anywhere in the world. All I can offer is what I know.
Helpful advice from the elven god of, and I am quoting you here, lies, treachery, and rebellion.
Depending on the story.
You fear barbarians will swoop down upon you.
Yes, swooping is bad.
All right, so let's talk about the Chasind. And this is really interesting because, like, in the games, unless you're really exploring codex entries and talking to everybody you come across, you don't get a lot of the background from the Chasind. So I'm excited about this. I've been looking forward to this episode for a long time. So the Chasind are another human tribe that's still around. Like we've said, they're in the Korcari wilds. Most Fereldans refer to them as Chasind Wilders because they are very much like in the wilds. They revere magic and they have a deep respect for the natural world. They even believe in animism, basically that all things have life and God in them, even plants and animals. And so in that way, like, they're kind of viewed as primitive, backwards, harmless almost. And so like the Fereldans, they're not really scared of them. It's just like, oh yeah, those wild people, like they live over there. They're not really a threat anymore to modern day Fereldans. And Chasind Wilders, they do have their own language, but they also understand the common tongue.
Yeah, don't Flemeth and Morrigan at some point, like, Morrigan hints to the point, like, that she and Flemeth, like, viewed the Chasind as just, like, amusing.
I don't remember if it's amusing, but, like, they pass themselves off as Chasind when they have to, like, go into town and stuff. Like, I think it's said that Flemeth's, like, lover was a Chasind. They view her as, like, a god. You know, so they are very close with the Chasind, naturally, because of where they live. You know,
exactly. Yes, very much so.
And you know, we've said earlier in the episode that they've waged war in the past with the Avvar, and they have done more than that too. But now they are more peaceful. They're not really waging war anymore. Probably a lot of it is due to reduced numbers. But I think most Fereldans, while some may think they're barbaric, most people just think, oh, they're like backwards and primitive. Like, whatever. They're not a threat is kind of how it is in the modern day.
Yeah. And I remember like talking about that, like a lot of the Chasind, now that I remember, like the Flemethal is like talking about how like she would basically like go in and like deal with any like threat that was really towards the Chasind. And like that's kind of like the god status, but like when you have that kind of protector, like your need to actually protect yourself
is lessened.
Yes.
And we'll get into more with Flemeth in a second. So I do want to get into the Chasind culture because it is pretty distinct from the rest of Thedas. So the Chasind, they paint their faces, though we don't always know what, if any, meaning that the markings have. You know, the other groups that I can think of that paint their faces are the rest of the Avvar and the Qunari. And that's really it. I mean, we get tattoos, facial tattoos with the dwarves and the elves, but that's different to me.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, it is interesting depending on, like, the marking of the face. I think like the most notable is obviously the elves and then the dwarfs, especially when we consider that, like, given what we know in the Veilguard, like the dwarfs are the only true like native creature to Thedas. Like everyone else like navigates there. Like obviously the elves are spirits made flesh, and then ancestors of descendants of those spirits that became mortal or took forms. And so like the dwarfs are those natural ones, but both the dwarfs and elves, who are the oldest races of Thedas, both have face tattoo kind of thing. So I think it's interesting that it's almost like you could read it as like their attempt to have that with the painting of the face, but they're not going so far as to like permanently mark their face.
Yeah. Well, and it is interesting. We don't know anything about the Syrian, but like the Syrian becomes Orlais, the Alamari become Fereldan, and so like they assimilate and become like quote unquote countries, and so they've lost that tradition. But the Avvar, the Chasind, they are still, you know, in their kind of tribal forms, and they still have those traditions. So it's an interesting connection there.
Orlais wears masks.
That's true.
Covering up the face.
That's true. All right, well, let's get back into the Chasind. So as far as like tribal structure goes, they are made up of many smaller tribes. Interestingly enough, each are led by a shaman who is typically a mage. This, of course, has led them to face raids from the Templars and persecution from Fereldans. But allegedly, the Chasind shamans are trained in their magic by witches of the wilds. In particular, Flemeth is celebrated by all of the Chasind tribes as the greatest witch of the wilds. And they typically pass these traditions of magic and of who they kind of revere, like Flemeth, passed down through the generations.
Interesting. I mean, I do think it's interesting, that kind of like notice of that. But I wonder if like their like affinity for animism and like being in tune with like the natural world makes them attuned to the fact that they notice that Flemeth is more than what she appears. And I guarantee that Flemeth's like shape-shifting ability, they see as like this high regard of like to be able to not only like communicate with animals but to become animals. I feel like would be a big deal for a culture like the Chasind.
I agree completely. So they do live in small villages made of houses and huts that they build on stilts, and sometimes even in the treetops of the forests. There are claims that some Chasind tribes eke out a life in the frozen wastes south, also known as the Sunless Lands, which are south of the Korkari Wilds. However, there are other claims that the Chasind send those who are called Agadi, or the exiled, to the frozen wastes. So there's a little bit of differing beliefs there, but either way, the frozen wastes, the Sunless Lands, not a place you want to go.
Yeah, probably riddled with darkspawn.
Darkspawn, that weird shadow lady. Yeah, no way. So, lastly, before we kind of get into their religion, the Chasind have designed a system of leaving behind hidden markers and signs in piles of stone and rubble. And this is how they mark trails, note places of interest, and even give warnings in a way that outsiders just simply cannot understand. To the untrained eye, these markers look indistinguishable from just a regular old pile of stones.
Interesting. But like with the Avvar, I like that kind of thing of like, this thing looks ordinary, but like to us who are in the know here, we know what these actually mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's talk about their religion for a little bit. As we mentioned earlier, they do practice animism. And they also interestingly believe that some people are particularly loved by the gods more than others. And so because of this, and because of the fact that they have to kill and defend themselves in the wilds, they have a practice of shaping their weapons into the likeness of animals. They do this in case they kill somebody who is particularly beloved by the gods, in hope that the gods will be confused by the animal on the weapon, and therefore think that it was the animal on the weapon that killed the beloved person instead of themselves, the Chasind. They also believe that the seasons are personified as female warriors. And during funerals, they typically pray to the Owl Mother, who has dominion over the spring and the tides. They also offer offerings from the mortal world and totems to the gods so that the deceased can use them in the afterlife.
Lots of combination of different
indigenous tribes, like the totem pole situation.
Which is, it's fine. It's believable. I kind of expect that in a video game tribal creation thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's really all that I have. I mean, it's pretty standard across when you think about indigenous tribes across the world.
Yeah. Yes. So we know of exactly one Chasind city or settlement. It's named Tombigbee. And its location is unknown, and really, in truth, it's not unknown. It's kept secret, and it is known only to the Chasind themselves. And so I would love to see the city. I would love to see it. It reminds me a lot of, if anybody has read my favorite fantasy ever, Robin Hobb's series, The Realm of the Elderlings. The Chasind really remind me of the Rain Wilds. I'm just saying, there's some similarities here, so I'd love to see the city, but that's okay. I'm Delulu over here. What?
Just laughing at you.
So let's talk about when the Chasind separated from the Alamari and what happened next. So they did separate in minus 1415 Ancient, which is when they moved into the Korkari wilds. The harsh, like swampy environment led them over the years to develop separately from the Avvar and the Alamari. And that's kind of why, that's the explanation of like why their culture is different. And it makes total sense to me. A person who lives in a swamp cannot possibly need or have the same, you know, traditions and needs that a person who lives in the middle of the mountains does. It's just reality, you know. But Tevinter, you know, when they begin their series of military campaigns into the lands of Fereldan in the 700s Ancient, you know, their plan is to move on to the Chasind after the Avvar. But the Avvar proved more difficult, as we discussed. And so that after they win their few victories, they kind of give up. They build their Imperial Highway and they just kind of stop in Ostagar. They had planned to keep going, battling the Chasind and all that, but like they were basically kind of like, you know what, this probably isn't worth it. Like, let's just build Ostagar and this highway and be done with it. And like, this can be the end of the line and we'll watch out for Chasind incursions and we're not going to go further into their territory. So I think that there's something here to be said that like, yes, the Tevinters are probably a little traumatized from the resistance that the Avvar put up, but at the same time, the Tevinters are also, you know, clearly the Chasind have a fearsome reputation. Like if the Chasind people were just like seen as this like peaceful, like we just love animals in the land, kind of how they are now in Fereldan, I feel like Tevinter just would have steamrolled over them and taken everything. So we know at least in history, they've been a little bit more aggressive than they are now.
Yes. And like, I remember in the game in Origins, people talk about the Chasind with like, yeah, they're a little primitive, but there's also like a little bit of fear, especially around Ostagar, where they're like, oh, well, we don't want to bother the Chasind.
True. Yeah, I feel like the Chasind are like most heavily concentrated around Ostagar and Lothering, like in that area, which makes me then wonder, like, how were they affected by the Fifth Blight and Veilguard? I don't know.
The world will never know.
No, it won't, but that's okay. So, you know, as we know, Tevinter abandons Ostagar in the wake of the First Blight. And so the Chasind take over the fortress. And in the Divine Age, a little bit later, the Avvar and the Chasind unite again to fight against the Alamari. We already talked about how that, you know, cements the location of the three tribes. But one of the things I really want to talk about is that there are conflicting accounts regarding the involvement of Flemeth with the Chasind. One Fereldan tale claims that Flemeth, a witch of the wilds, gathered an army and invaded the Fereldan Valley only to be slain by the hero Cormac. However, according to Morrigan, while the Chasind invaded the lowlands of the Alamari at some point, Flemeth had nothing to do with it. She also claims that Cormac led a brutal civil war against his own people under the pretense of vanquishing an evil that had taken root amongst the lords, and that Flemeth had only been attached to the legend in retrospect. So there are, as we probably have seen throughout history, people have a tendency to attach Morgan and Flemeth's name to pivotal historical events. But there are many stories of Flemeth being associated with the Chasind, so there is still something there.
Yeah, well, and I think pretty much that she and Morrigan kind of admit to the fact, like, yeah, we tend to just stay near the Chasind, and like Morgan does hint, as you say, with like addressing the point of like, it's easy to blend in as them, so we stay close to them, so it's believable that we're just Chasind.
Yeah. So I do have just a couple more things about the Chasind in the modern era. So they do appear in Origins as refugees from the Blight. I'm pretty sure that the dog master guy in Ostagar, I'm pretty sure he's Chasind. You can kind of tell by what they wear in their hair. And then lastly, they are mentioned in the Veilguard. The Veilguard didn't forget everything, guys. So the Inquisitor sends envoys to the Chasind and the Avvar, which kind of help them agree to an uneasy, at least, alliance with the current ruler of Fereldan. The first time, the Alamari, the descendants of the Alamari, the Avvar, and the Chasind have united in hundreds of years. They unite against the Blight.
And that makes sense. I mean, there's a history and precedent of them understanding that, that some things are worth putting down these old ancient grudges for.
Yeah. Right.
To Tevinter, the Blight.
Your entire world dying. That's what we're talking about here.
And you'd have to be pretty freaking dense to not see what is happening in the Veilguard as this is world ending.
I mean, yeah, but people time and time again in Thedas have seen a blight coming and refused to help. The elves of the Dales, Tevinter.
Yeah, I know.
All right. Well, do you have any final thoughts on the Chasind?
I don't think so. I think we covered everything, really.
All right. Well, the last tribe I want to talk about is the Clayne. And, for a tribe that would come to dominate and win the battle to establish Fereldan, we actually know very little about the Clayne tribe. I'm sure, in fact, Austin, you didn't even know that this was a thing until this episode.
Correct.
Yes. But we do know they were originally part of the group of Alamari and broke off at some unnamed date. One of the most significant members of the Clayne tribe that we know quite a bit about is Luthias Dwarfson. As you can imagine by the name, he was pretty short in stature. We do not know officially if he was the son of a dwarf or if that was just a name given to him based on his stature, but I think it was likely biologically that he was the son of dwarven parentage for reasons that will become clear later on. Mm-hmm. So let's get into his story a little bit. When Luthias was 12 years old, he saved another boy named Tutha. Tutha was the son of the Maybean, who was the leader of a fellow Clayne tribal chieftain. Tutha was being attacked by his own Mabari, who had gone rabid. The chieftain was so impressed that A, Luthias would save somebody who didn't know, and B, kill a Mabari with his own bare hands. And so Maybean adopted Luthias. He grew in reputation and became known for his charisma, strength, and persistence. Eventually, Maybean would send Luthias on a mission to Orzammar. They wanted an alliance between the Clayne tribes and the dwarves. While there, Luthias fell in love with the king's daughter named Skea. Unfortunately, the king of Orzammar refused to ally with the Clayne. Perhaps because they already had an alliance with the Avvar, we don't know. But Luthias's love ran away with him back to the Clayne tribe. She taught him the dwarven art of the berserkers, which made him an even more powerful warrior. On the day of their wedding, it's said that the Lady of the Skies brought the battle mace Sundering as a wedding gift, which would eventually become his preferred weapon. This is notable for the story itself, obviously, but also because it tells us that what we now know as the Avvar gods were likely shared gods between all the tribes of the Avvar, the Chasind, the Clayne, and maybe even the Alamari. Did you have thoughts?
No, that's interesting. Because really, once Andraste rolls around, the Alamari kind of abandon their polytheism for the Maker religion.
Solely, yeah, for sure. Which, understandable that, she's their own religious figure. So that makes sense. But as the years go on, Luthias becomes very powerful, enough to replace his adopted father as chieftain. During a feast between the leaders of the Alamari and the Avvar, sometime around -30 Ancient, Luthias was seduced by Morriganon, the beautiful chieftain of the Avvar. When Skea learned of their tryst, she decided to leave him and return to Orzammar. When Luthias refused Morganon's subsequent marriage offer, she became enraged and declared war on the Clayne. They had been fighting for 15 years when a young warrior from Morganon's tribe challenged Luthias to a duel. Though he suffered grievous wounds, Luthias managed to kill the boy. Upon the boy's death, Morganon revealed that the boy had in fact been Luthias's very own son, conceived during their tryst 15 years ago. After this, the tide of the war turned against Luthias, and he lost battle after battle after battle until he found himself pushed all the way back to the foothills of the Frostbacks. The two tribes were on the eve of the final face-off when Skea returned to Luthias to gift him a dwarven armor in exchange for one more night together. Luthias agreed, of course, what man wouldn't, and wore the armor on the battlefield the very next day when he faced Morganon. He managed to slay her, but not before suffering lethal wounds himself, his armor inexplicably failing to stop Morganon's final blow, most likely from her mace Thunderstrike. The battle, fought in minus 355 Ancient, became known as the Battle of Red Falls. After his death, the king of Orzammar claimed Luthias's body to have him buried within the stone. That is why I think he was the son of a dwarf.
I think I definitely agree with that. Also, just like again, like the thing of like your own lust for power and everything else is your own downfall, because he trusts Skea with that armor, and it doesn't protect him from Morganon's mace. Which is probably like the idea of Skea just wanted like to try to conceive his heir so that she could inherit his power or whatnot. But I just think it's an interesting story.
It's a great story. And I mean, I think there's a lot of questions like, were Skea and Morganon working together? Like, did the armor have an intentional weakness? Like, is Luthias's body claimed by the king of Orzammar in revenge for taking away his daughter and like wanting nobody to know that they, you know, messed with the armor? Like, you know, there's just a lot of questions there.
My personal crackpot theory is that Skea and Morganon were in love, and this was their plot to be together.
They could have just been together. Like,
no,
they don't have to have a crackpot theory.
This is the crackpot.
All right, you have cracked the pot. We'll go with that. So the Clayne also, in addition to Orzammar, the Avvar, they battle with Tevinter and the elves as well. So they battle with Tevinter separate from Andraste's war. This battle involves the Brazilian forest because the Tevinter magisters wanted the land and fought to take it from the Clayne. The Codex tells this story better than I could. This is what it says, quote, Magister Hayark brought an army to this forest, led by Alaric, his friend and general. For Alaric, Hayark fashioned a suit of the finest armor, infused it with lyrium and his own blood magic, and named it Juggernaut, after the unstoppable giant golems guarding the gates of Minrathous. Thus armed, did Alaric win many victories against the Clayne. When defeat came, it came from within. Alaric's own lieutenants rose up against him, jealous of the favor he had curried with the magisters and eager to take the Juggernaut armor from him. Alaric was slain, and as each successor gained the armor, the other lieutenants turned against him instead. The Tevinter outpost fell to vicious infighting. In a fury, Magister Hayark voyaged to the outpost and slew the last 3 lieutenants. The Clayne, however, were already approaching the outpost in force. The barbarian chieftain of the Clayne desired the fabled armor for himself, and even with all his power, Hayark could not hope to stand against them all. Instead, Hayark used the last of his own life force to cast a spell of blood magic that bound demons to the bodies of the 3 dead lieutenants as well as his own lifeless corpse. These bound revenants hid the pieces of the Juggernaut armor, and although the barbarians sacked the outpost, the chieftain found neither the armor nor the revenants. This codex entry comes from the Juggernaut armor that you can find in the Brazilian forest in Dragon Age Origins, which is the best armor in the game.
Yes. I remember that.
And then lastly, we also know that the Clayne battled the elves. Master Island describes this in the Sabre origin story, and he claims that the Dalish fought the Clayne as the elves were fleeing the exalted march. As the Elven Kingdom collapsed, multiple Elven clans united into one force to find a new homeland. We're not certain why the Clayne and the elves had conflict, but I think we can assume it's probably over land. The elves probably wanted to settle on the Clayne territory, and the Clayne did not want to let them do that. Nonetheless, the tribes of elves battled the Clayne and inflicted many casualties on the humans, which would, in fact, help the elves stake a claim on this new land, we can assume, in the Brazilian forest, because that's where some Dalish clans are still to this day.
Mm-hmm.
And then the very last thing I want to talk about with the Clayne is Calenhad, of course, because Calenhad is a member of the Clayne tribe, and they would unite under him in the Exalted Age around the 500s, and would later go on to form Fereldan as we know it today. And so pretty much everybody who's native to Fereldan is either a descendant of the Alamari or the Clayne tribes.
I think it's so interesting that, like, the Alamari holds so much power and so much sway, but, like, the line of kings for Fereldan comes from the Clayne tribe.
Yes. Well, it is very interesting because Calenhad, like, and we'll talk about this when we get to his episode soon, but, like, he completely usurps everything. He's just his own man, 100%.
How very Fereldan.
I know. So true. All right. What are your thoughts about these three tribes? Any thoughts overarching or specifically?
I think in, like, comparing these to the Alamari and the Syrian, of, like, obviously there's, like, less about these individually, and, like, I'm just really interested, and I wish we had more interactions with more individual tribes, but obviously, like, the Clayne and Alamari are not really around anymore, as with the Syrian, and but I just really like the attention to detail that these tribes and clans bring to the world, because instead of, like, just the world existing as it is and plopping it down, like, it feels developed and progressed, which makes it feel more real.
Yes.
And that's the, like, purpose that these tribes serve in that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I also just think it's interesting, the dichotomy of where you have, like, the Alamari, the Syrian, and the Clayne, and then on the other hand, you have the Avvar and the Chasind, where, like, the Avvar and the Chasind have these distinct cultural identities, and, like, they're still tribal people into the modern day, whereas the other three, we know less about them. We know less about their history and their culture and their distinctions, but Fereldan and Orlais became Fereldan and Orlais. So, like, they are still around. They are still more dominant than these other tribes that are kind of, you know, smaller. They're not really, like, a quote unquote country. They don't have quote unquote status in the world. And, like, that's not always a bad thing. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, like, oh, well, the bigger you are and the more money you have and the nicer things you have equates to how good you are as a person. Like, I'm not saying that, but the development is interesting of, like, how they got to where they are, and comparing that where, like, all these tribes started out on an equal playing field, and they developed in so different ways, whereas some of them are on top in society, like the Syrian, whereas, you know, the Chasind, they're some of the lowest of the low. You know, they're relegated to the backwoods of Lothering, you know, not a place most people would want to live.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And just the development of like, and it's, like, not even, like, It's the difference of like, are we going to isolate ourselves off and remain our cultural identity, or are we going to allow this assimilation and progress and learn? And I think we see these, especially when cultures like collide, and the ones that I'm really thinking of right now are obviously like, this is a bad example, but like the European colonists and the Native Americans and that. But really I'm thinking about the Danes and the Anglo-Saxons.
Yeah.
There are Anglo-Saxon communities and Dane communities who are like, no, we're going to be separate. We're going to keep our culture. But the majority of them end up assimilating and blending to each other in creating what we would know as like, quote unquote, the English.
True. Yeah. And I think that I don't think that anybody in Thedas was like thinking of like the strategy of like, should we integrate? Should we make our own country? Should we keep our tribal identity? Like, I don't think they're thinking about it that much. I think it's just kind of the way things developed. And, some of them had really, really strong leaders that succeeded in wars, whereas others, had strong leaders that were felled in wars, which is the nature of war. And so the history, the battles, the war, the famines determined how the history happened. And that affects, how this people group developed. And I think it is realistic because there are some tribes that stay tribal, that stay isolated. Like there are still tribes today that have not made much contact with the outside world. There are other tribes that have completely assimilated into dominant culture and have become dominant culture. And so, it's realistic in that way.
I also think like with the Avvar specifically, because Mathrath was an Avvar.
Yeah, he was. Mathrath was an Avvar.
And like, I feel like that comes to the point of like the Avvar being like as a cautionary tale and just being like, look, Mathrath got involved with the Alamari and all these people and moved on, and look what happened to him.
Yeah, we're not doing that.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right, well, let's get into today's side character. We don't know a lot about him, but we are talking about Dragon Age 2's Mark of the Assassin DLC. And this character is named Cahir, and he is Duke Prosper's bodyguard. And you first see Cahir when Hawk and company arrive at Chateau Hain. Hawk actually immediately recognizes that Cahir is a member of the Chasind tribe. You can then express your thoughts on the Chasind as a people group, which elicits an amused response from the Duke. Cahir, though, regardless of whether you're positive or negative about his people, is completely unfazed. When Hawk is in the Chateau Hain dungeons, there is a choice to escape by traveling through a tunnel system under the mountain or fighting through the chateau. If Hawk chooses to go up the stairs into the vaults, Duke Prosper ambushes the champion and leaves Cahir to kill you. Cahir, irritated at being abandoned, then leaves the fight to Prosper's soldiers to unleash, quote, the pets. After this, Hawk is forced to continue on through the tunnels. In the caves, Cahir will try to trap you and your companions while separating Talus from the group. He is accompanied by the pets, as mentioned earlier, which are a group of crazed mages that he claims responsibility for in having broken them. When Hawk queries, why would you fight for a man who abandoned you to face us? Cahir explains that he doesn't care anything for Prosper or the Duke's enemies. He prefers to have more interesting fights against capable opponents of his own, such as Hawk. And so then the Chasind man attacks you and you kill him, allowing the party to travel on through the tunnels freely. And that's about all we know.
I think that's really, really interesting because like we just talked about the Chasind being like peaceable and like fight, and like he's like, no, I'm here for honor and battle, which I feel like is so Avvar coded.
Yeah, well, it's like kind of also like I think this is less about being Chasind or Avvar or whatever, and more of like, okay, you're just a sadistic freak, like breaking. Who finds like you're gonna break a human being? Like, okay, that's insane. Like, you don't need to be around any human being, any person ever. Like, I'm terrified of you. Goodbye.
Yeah, the like obsession with dominance and control, and like, I'm so powerful because I control this other person, because I've mentally tortured them and broken them down, is not great.
Well, it makes sense then why he's allied with Duke Prosper.
Yes, but she's not. He's really just allied with I get what I want if I stay with this guy. But yeah,
that's true.
Do you have anything else about Cahir?
I do not have anything else about Cahir, and that's pretty much all I have for this episode.
All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this research and bringing this in. As always, as I knew, this series is super fascinating and super great, and I greatly appreciate it. So thank you, and thank you all for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. If you have any lore questions, topics to cover, or side character suggestions, join the Cups Podcasting and More Discord server. It's the best place on the internet.
You can also support the podcast financially and ensure its continuation by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/DALorecast. If you enjoyed the show or learned something new today, please subscribe, leave us a review, rating, or comment, or join our Patreon.
The Dragon Age Lorecast is part of the Robots Radio Podcasting Network. If you enjoyed our intro or outro music, give a big shout out to Pipeman Studios. Until next time, look to the sky. The dawn will come.
Every act of change begins with a neighbor, with someone saying,
"We take care of each other here."
In food banks and food pantries, neighbors pack fresh food and dignity into every box, moving food from farms to families through Feeding America's nationwide network. So when that box reaches a home, it carries more than food. It carries a promise that together we can end hunger. Feeding America, led by neighbors. Give now to end hunger at feedingamerica.org.
The right window treatments change everything. Your sleep, your privacy, the way every room looks and feels. At Blinds.com, we've spent 30 years making it surprisingly simple to get exactly what your home needs. We've covered over 25 million windows and have 50,000 five-star reviews to prove we deliver. Whether you DIY it or want a pro to handle everything from measure to install, we have you covered. Real design professionals, free samples, zero pressure. Right now, get up to 45% off site-wide, plus get a free professional measure at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions apply.